So Bob, patron emails, what do you say?
Yeah.
So patron Brenda on Patreon, she commented about something that I think is relevant to you and I that I wanted to ask you about. I recently reran an episode in which you and I talked about being late to sessions as a therapist.
Yeah, that one generated some mail.
And I was pretty much going off on therapists. This is before I knew you.
Yeah.
Because it was a later episode.
I think about you every hour when I'm
What do you
starting
mean?
a new session.
What do you mean?
Every hour of every week, of every client, when the session starts, I think about you. It's like, it's 9:01. It's Kirk. And I don't really have a complete thought, but it's like, oh yeah, Kirk. It's 9 o'clock. Okay, Kirk.
Walk me through. What is the vibe? Is he upset with me? What would he say?
Yeah, what would he say?
So the session starts at 9:01.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh crap, or not? Oh, well, what do you think? Just independent of my voice, that's like wormed its way into your head. What?
I wonder, what does my client think about this? I'm pretty punctual.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll start a session at 9:02. 9:01.
You're very punctual with me.
With you, I'm here. Yeah, I actually did good. I got here in 12 minutes.
You're like, I will, if I invite you to a thing or you say you're going to show, I always figure you'll be on time or even a little early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But you've said that there are times when you get kind of frazzled with a bunch of clients and you go over with one client or something.
Yeah, that's a mismanagement of my own emotions, really, is what that is.
What do you mean?
If you don't end a session on time, it's because you're not if I don't end a session on time, it's because I'm not managing my own feelings. Because it is reasonable for a session to end at 5 minutes to. That's my policy, is 55-minute hour.
Meaning that I'm inserting my own interpretation that you worry that you're not being a good therapist if you don't go long. Right? Yeah. You're with a client and it's getting particularly kind of interesting at the end or intense at the end or something, and you feel bad. You don't want to just cut it off.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there should always be flexibility. One shouldn't be rigid about such things on the one hand. But on the other hand, virtually no session needs to go longer than 55 minutes. Mm-hmm. And if they do, it's because I haven't managed my own feelings well enough to honor my own limit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, countertransference,
I want to, that's counter.
Yeah, I mean, well, you could categorize it as that.
You could, yeah. Oh, Cap, I don't remember what I was going to say. Anyways, so mostly I'm good these days. I'm actually punctual 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you're late, you're how late?
Like a minute, two.
Minute or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So patron Brenda on Patreon.
Oh, right.
She was talking about, as a clinician herself, she's late to sessions sometimes. Mm-hmm. And she said the following thing. She says, there's so many facets to why I'm late to sessions sometimes as a clinician. She says procrastination due to anxiety, schedule resistance. Well, let's break each one of these down. So patron Brenda says procrastination due to anxiety is one of the reasons why she's late to her own sessions as a clinician. What do you think that means?
I guess it means she's anxious about being a therapist, and so she puts it off.
Yeah. Then she says schedule resistance. What do you think that means?
I think that means she doesn't like being stuck to a calendar and having to be where she promised to be or agreed to be. Right.
That's interesting because I have zero of that, clearly, right? I don't have any. I love a schedule. Like, I am massively scheduled.
Yeah.
In fact, it's one of the weird benefits of being a therapist, and I guess a podcaster now, is I get to work my schedule every day.
Oh, right.
It's one of the first things I think about when I wake up in the morning is like, what's on the docket? What's on the schedule?
Right. Yeah.
And I think about like, okay, when am I going to have lunch? When am I going to take my nap? When am I going to do this?
Right.
How do what's my energy going to be like for this thing?
Right. Yeah.
I have an extra hour here. Mm-hmm. What do I want to do with that hour?
Yeah.
Like I love planning all 16 hours out, and it's like, how can I shove as much activity and meaning and productivity into this 16-hour stint of being awake.
Right.
And I didn't realize when I decided to become a therapist that I'd have this benefit because, most people, they wake up, they go to work and they do their work and they go home and there's just kind of a routine,
Mm-hmm.
but, for therapists, every day is kind of an adventure, particularly if you're also a professor and a podcaster.
Well, right. Yeah.
So I have no schedule resistance, but I do know people who do because of their early childhood relational traumas where they're being yelled at, because, maybe someone has ADHD or something,
that.
some other kind of issue that makes it extra hard for them to stick to a schedule, and they get criticized a lot. And you can take a number of routes, and one of the routes you can take is like, I'm just going to reject all scheduling or agreeing to doing anything, or anytime anyone tries to hold me to that, I'm going to push back against that, because I'll be damned if I'm going to succumb to that kind of oppression. And then you enter the field of therapy yourself, and you impose your own schedule on yourself, and then you resist it to yourself, essentially. You know what I mean? Then she also says executive function limitations, which sounds like ADHD adjacent or literal. Sometimes that's the term that we use in my field, is we won't say ADHD, we'll say executive function issue, because it's more descriptive and sometimes more accurate to conceptualize it that way, and less likely to be misunderstood as to what it means by people. Anyway, non-conforming or compliance resistance. So I think that's similar to schedule resistance.
Yeah.
Laissez-faire and easygoing personality traits. What do you think what do you think's going on there?
I think that's schedule resistance.
Yeah, because you can be easygoing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to think that I'm at least on the easygoing spectrum.
Yeah, for 12 of the 16 hours a day, you're probably easygoing.
Well, what do we mean by easygoing, right? Well, so I could see this two different ways. So there are free spirits, right? There are people who are living in the moment, who are flexible. Yeah. They aren't rigid. Right. They go with the flow. Okay. So those aren't bad things. It's just a thing. And you could find that to be very pleasant to be with someone like that. On this podcast, for example, you're pretty easygoing and flexible. You sit down and I just launch into shit and you just go with it.
I do.
Yeah. So
it's like improv class.
Yeah. For me, I don't know if I were in your shoes, if I would adjust as well as you do to that.
One of the benefits is I don't have to prep.
Yeah.
I just get to show up.
Right. Which would be harder for me. You know what I mean? So, but that's a good direction of laissez-faire, easygoing. But then there's another side, easygoing, laissez-faire, especially in relation to being on time, which is another way of framing in a positive way schedule resistance, potentially. She also says neurodivergent needs, which I think is in the executive function issue. And so she asks, how do I reinforce behaviors or attitudes about being on time? Bob, what do you think? What do you do?
I had a colleague, one of the best therapists I ever met, say to us in a consult meeting, don't give me a pat solution for this thing, because she was 10 minutes late to every session. So she'd be 10 minutes late to the next session because she was 10 minutes late to the present session.
So wait, you're in a group supervision?
Yeah.
And so your fellow supervisee is talking to your group supervisor.
She's actually just talking to the team.
Talking to the team.
Yeah.
So it's a consultation. Among colleagues.
Yeah.
And your colleague is saying she's perpetually late to our sessions by 10 minutes, and then she goes over 10 minutes, and then she's 10 minutes late.
And she's like, I don't want you guys to try to solve this for me, because anything you say, I've already tried, and it doesn't work. And so we didn't. We just listened to her, and she has pain around being 10 minutes late. It's not the worst pain in the universe. And that was 15 years ago. My guess is it's still the same. And she's an excellent therapist.
Now, if you were frequently 10 minutes late as a therapist, and you had a conversation with all your clients about that, then there's a pretty good chance it's not going to harm your clients, because they just learn to expect it, and they know they're going to be able to go over by 10 minutes. Yeah. The problem is when it's random and extremely late. I mean, I've had people tell me that their therapists will be 35 minutes late to a session every fourth session or something like that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's harmful to the client. That's what it is. And I think that people will sometimes hear me when I'm talking about this as if I'm anal and I'm just shaking fist at clouds, like, get off my lawn. I'm trying to protect your fucking clients, people. I care about your clients. I also care about your practice. Yeah. I care about you as a clinician in terms of the treatment that you're providing, which of course you also care. I'm not talking to you, but I'm talking to everyone. Your clients deserve you to at least try to address it. You know, let's say you you do, patron Brenda, let's say you do everything you possibly can reasonably, and you're still occasionally late. Well, you've done everything you can. Maybe it's a neurodivergent issue. Maybe it's this issue that you're still working on in therapy or something. Who knows? Maybe there are outside factors, like your kid is in the hospital. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that can happen, which is, I would say, rare. Like in the episode, I was re-listening to the rerun. I was like, people will say, but there was traffic. And I'll be like, well, unless you just crawled out under a rock, you understood that traffic is a phenomenon that can happen at times, particularly at certain times of the day.
Seattle?
Yeah, in Seattle. And so if you're late because of traffic, that's on you, because you should have accounted for that. I do that. I would show up to class on time well before the class started, right? When I was an adjunct.
You had to prep for traffic.
Because I would account for the possibility of traffic.
Yeah.
Sometimes that meant I was literally an hour and a half early to school.
Well.
But I would bring my laptop so I could do extra work, or I don't know, just figure it out. So I'm saying all this because I've heard so many horror stories from clients, and when you are late to a session as a therapist, 99% of the time, even though your client is being harmed and is hurt and their treatment is suffering, your client will not say anything.
Oh, no, they'll never, no.
Because they're afraid.
Yeah.
And they don't know they can say anything or something like that. So it's an imperative that as therapists, we hold ourselves to that standard, among many others, because clients are oppressed. They are an oppressed group. And especially if you're a member of another oppressed group beyond being a client, then you're even less likely to speak up. So,
I think you're talking about the power dynamic. There's a power dynamic, and you're saying that the clients will experience themselves as having less power than the therapist, and so they'll keep their mouth shut because that's what we do.
Now, if you are late occasionally, and you just know that's going to happen because your kid has issues at school or whatever, there's some sort of impingement on your, is that a word, on your schedule?
Yeah.
Then you have to put it in your disclosure statement, and or you have to have verbal conversations with your clients and document that, and just say, in the effort of protecting you from the harm that I will do to you because of me being late, I want to inform you in advance that I might be late. So if that's an issue, you might want not to hire me, or let's just have a conversation. I don't want to tell you exactly why I'm late at times, but it's something that I can't really control for. And so
I think it's a fantastic idea. So
let's talk about it. Did it hurt your feelings, or how do you feel about it? Or what do you want? How can I make up for it? You can have conversations, but 99% of the time, that's not what happens. The therapist just shows up late, 15 minutes late, and it just gets swept under the rug. And I don't think that that's okay.
Oh, you're not going to get an argument from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, if you do everything in your power to change it, and it doesn't change, then okay, you know what I mean? But do something.
Then you definitely want to have the conversation with your client or your clients that this is a thing, and then they get a choice. They can sort of take you or leave you. But if they take you, then part of what they're taking is that, and it doesn't have to be like my therapist is chronically 5 minutes late, and he has scheduling resistance, is my guess. But I have to say,
does he go 5 minutes over?
Oh yeah, he'll always extend.
Yeah. So he probably knows or intuits that everyone understands that that's the thing, and everyone expects it.
Well, what I'm thinking about though is I think it actually would be a good idea if he made it overt, if he just put it in his disclosure statement, or just said to all new people, "This is a thing for me," and just owned it, because he's actually he's good at owning it when we talk about it, and we will talk about it. I noticed though that I don't have an emotional response to it anymore. I don't actually care.
But you did in the beginning?
Yeah, I did. And actually, it was really useful that I did, and we got a chance to talk about that, because, my thing is, it's like the thing we were talking about earlier. I don't ask for help, so I'm not going to raise a complaint. And, so it was really good that we could talk about it, but actually, I don't care. On balance, that relationship is really helpful to me, and so...
Right. He has proven to you that he cares.
Yeah.
And that it's not a thing.
But if we never talked about it, it would be a thing.
Yeah. And just to put a fine point on it. Now, you're a therapist, you kind of know the gig, but imagine you're just a regular client.
Right.
And you have disorganized attachment, or you have a lot of attachment issues
Right.
that are wrapped up in the transference of the therapy relationship.
Right.
And you show up, you bust, particularly in person, I suppose, you commute, you get a parking spot, you
Right.
fight traffic,
Yeah.
you get an umbrella, you walk up to the office, you sit, and you're really looking forward to the session. This is very important.
Yeah.
Maybe something literally just happened that morning that was a trauma for you, and you need to talk with your
Yeah.
therapist. It's a big deal. And you're just sitting there, and you look at your clock, you're like, okay, good. It's 1 minute until my session starts. Right. They're going to come get me. And then that minute comes, and the person's sitting there, and another minute goes by, and they're like, I really want to talk with my therapist. Another minute goes by. When's my session going to start? Another minute goes by. Does my therapist even know I'm here?
Yeah.
Another minute goes by. Another minute goes by.
Oh, yeah.
Another minute goes by. Does my therapist not care about me? Am I less important to my therapist than my other client than his other clients? Do I matter? Am I being rejected and abandoned? I've literally, the client could say, I remember waiting for my dad to show up during visitation, and in the exact, I got my sleeping bag, I got
Right.
my bag ready, I'm
Yep.
sitting on the porch,
Yep.
and I'm just desperately wanting my dad to show up, and
Right.
here I am again waiting for dad to show up, and he's just not showing. And this dad, my therapist, this dad figure, knows my issue. I've talked with him about my abandonment issues, and now we're 10 minutes, 11 minutes.
And then they show and they don't say anything about it.
Right.
Or they're cursory. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. As if that's sufficient.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. So you ask patron Brenda, how do you reinforce behaviors? Which is a great question. What can you do? Well, lots of possibilities. One is to form a habit. Habits are, the reason why I wasn't born as someone who's on time. I develop habits. There are things that kick into play automatically for me because I've done it so many times and I've been burned. I mean, the reason when I was younger, I would be late occasionally, and I would take it so seriously that I would really evaluate what I did wrong, what went wrong. And a part of it is approach and thinking and prep. I had never really thought about this, but I think this happens every time that I need to be on time for something. I will think, well, it's probably 35 minutes drive, especially now with Google Maps. You can really tell how long it'll take to get there, right?
That's true. So
I'm like, okay, I need to be there at 2. If it's a 35-minute drive, then if I leave it at 1:25, I'll be good. But I've learned through experience that if I begin the process of leaving at 1:25, I'll be in the car at 1:30 and I'll be on the road at 1:35. You know what I mean? So I have to add in another 10 or 15 minutes of putting on my shoes, and especially if I'm with Stacy, like she needs a little bit of a ramp up, and then there's dealing with the dogs and walking outside, and there's just all these little things that sort of you don't think take time, but of course they do. And so as a habit, I always will, and there's a resistance in my mind. I'm like, especially if I'm not really wanting to leave, because I want to do other things, there'll be this little why in the road in my head of just like, well, but I could probably rush out the door and I'll get there on time. And I have to, through habit, I tell myself, don't do that. You'll feel shitty. You don't want to be in the car knowing you're going to be late. That's a bad feeling. I'm not feeling it right now, but I don't want to feel that feeling. And so I have this habit right now where I'm going to default to the safe road as opposed to taking a risk.
that you have a habit of that kind of self-talk.
Yeah.
You will not like it if is a great thing for Brenda to consider.
Right. So to start doing that, you'll have to put a lot of cognitive effort into remembering and following through with that cognitive habit or that behavior. Over time, you do it for years. Eventually, you just do it automatically. It just happens automatically. So, and there's dozens of habits one would engage in or could engage in to begin to be more likely to be on time. Other kinds of things like checking your schedule more often. That's another thing that I do, is I just have this habit. In fact, I have my calendar open on my computer on a separate screen at all times.
I use a paper calendar still.
Yeah.
It's on its own screen.
Well, your paper calendar, is it open and...
Oh, it's always open. And usually what I do at the end of a workday is I look and see what's going on at the beginning of the next workday.
Right. So that's a habit that you probably developed because you got burned one time by
more than once.
By like, oh crap, I forgot I had an early appointment or something that isn't normal.
Yeah.
Right?
Boy, you do that once or twice and that's a painful one. Yeah.
Like what? Like what happened?
I've forgotten appointments.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just simply not showed.
Yeah. Oh.
And
as a therapist.
As a therapist occasionally, and then, other bits of life too.
Yeah.
And that feels awful. Especially as a therapist, does it feel awful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing to do, and this is common supervision talk, is that you keep an eye on the clock while you're in session so you don't go over with any clients. You look at the clock. So
I bought a chime that went off 10 minutes before every hour. That would remind me that it was time to. It was a nice sound. It wasn't like a. It was just a little chime.
Yeah. Not only to you, but to the client. Because clients don't usually want to get into intense material just before the end either.
Right.
Some clients do. You'll have a rare client that will.
Yeah. Doorknob comment.
Doorknob comment or doorknob revelation or something.
Yeah.
Meaning that their hands on the doorknob, they're about to walk out of the session, and that's when they drop the bomb that they should have started with because they're trying to avoid it or something.
Right.
So you have some sort of practice, some sort of routine where not only do you keep an eye on the clock, particularly towards the end, but you have ways of helping the session wrap up more organically.
Right.
So that you're not in a position where you're like, oh shit. Like occasionally, this happened to me a couple of months ago. Whole session, we were talking about just regular kinds of things, and it was going well, I thought. Mm-hmm. And then I was assuming the clients had progressed further than they actually had. And I just was, forging ahead with the conversation pretty lackadaisically or without regard to the risks, because I didn't think there was a risk because I had falsely concluded that the material we were talking about was not of a sensitive nature for them. And in the last minute of the session, I just kept walking down the road, and then boom, this sensitivity came up, and this issue between the couple came up. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. They still have. Why did I assume that this was completely gone? Like, this issue has been around for a long time. Why did I just make an assumption that wasn't there anymore? Of course, it's still it's better than it has been, but it's still kind of there. And it felt really weird to just end the session because some stuff started to come up between the couple, some pretty serious hurt and upsettedness. And it felt really awkward to just end the session normally. So I did go along with them. Right. Now, if my memory serves, I didn't have any clients after that session, so it didn't cause a problem. But
not for another client, it didn't cause a problem.
Right. But in the past, if I had a more tightly packed schedule, it could have been.
It sure would have.
I would have had to make a sacrifice. That was a mistake of mine, not to monitor the material as we start to head to the end of a session. Anyway, another thing that you can do to reinforce a habit, patron Brendan, and this goes for any habit really, not just being late, but is to look at what the anxiety is. What you say schedule resistance. So what are the thoughts, the automatic thoughts that enter into your mind when you start thinking about schedules or when you start trying to be on time? There are thoughts that'll enter your mind, schemas that will come into play that you want to have self-awareness around and counteract it cognitively, but also heal from. I don't know for you, Brenda, but it's possible that you deserve to go through a lot of healing regarding people yelling at you about being on time or consequencing you for having a neuro difference, right?
So to the extent that this has to do with some kind of resistance that's not, organic or, neuro, whatever, you could ask yourself, what's the function of lateness? What am I doing?
What need are you trying to address by being late?
By being late.
Yeah.
Now that if there's a neurologic or executive function problem, then, you're not going to look for any kind of need being met, because that's just
Right.
the brain being a brain, whatever.
Yeah.
But if there is something further than that, and I think Brenda's pretty clear there is, then what is the function of it? Is
Yeah.
it to stake a claim? Is it to protest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are all highly likely.
Yeah.
Now, if it is a executive function issue, which doesn't have to do with schemas, it's just a neuro difference.
Thing.
It's well understood that if you want to have so you can either do what we were saying earlier, you can literally just tell your clients, I have an executive function limitation that makes it harder for me to show up on time.
Yep.
So I want that to be clear before you engage with me. It's in my disclosure statement.
Right. And here's my policy when that happens.
Yeah, right. Here's my policy that if I can, I'll go over,
Yeah.
or I will make up for it another time. Or you could literally just tell people, if it's in your disclosure, you're just going to have to live with it as a client. And I'm sorry for that, but them's the breaks. This is a limitation on me.
Yeah.
Give people that information before they hire you,
Yeah.
and then you can certainly apologize. Say, yeah, I'm sorry, but I told you in the beginning
Right.
that I had this issue,
And it can still be a thing that's talked about.
yeah,
In fact,
how
might
it affects the client. And all
it
that
might
stuff.
even be easier for a client to talk about it if it's that card's already on the table.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I'm late. How's it impacting you?
Right.
As opposed to I'm late. Suck it up, which
Right.
I think is the unspoken thing that maybe therapists expect.
The other direction is well understood with executive function limitations is you have to have a lot of workarounds. You have to have a lot of measures in place to make up for it or to try to account for it. So you have an alarm, for example, like Bob was saying, or you have someone or an app that sends you an alarm or whatever. You have all these different things or reminders, Post-it notes, little reminders around to make sure that you stay on task or remember that there's a schedule, or maybe just get a giant clock that sits right behind the client's head, that kind of thing. I don't know. There's different ways to work around.
4 clocks in my 10 by 12 office, one on each corner of the couch, one next to me, and one on the wall.
Yeah, I used to have
I love
that too.
having clocks.
Yeah, I used to have that too.
Yeah.
To me, there's a perfect. So, where's your perfect location of the clock in terms of your visual field?
Upper outside shoulder of client, so I don't have to glance too far away, or on the end table next to the client when I had a couch. And
So, how many degrees are we talking?
Oh, we're talking maybe 10 degrees.
So just right off of their shoulder.
Yeah.
So you can see the clock out of your peripheral vision.
Yeah, or when I glance at it, it's not taking my eyes too far away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually would train my trainees to consider this. And sometimes they would have to, at the beginning of the day, because they were working in different offices every day at their agencies, they would have to replace the clock.
Yeah.
Because it's important, because if the clock, for example, is to your side or even behind you, or you have a watch or a phone,
Right.
and you're talking to a client, and throughout the session you have to very obviously avert your eyes to look at the clock, it can tweak a client because it makes it look like you're bored, or you can't wait for the session to be over, or something like that. So you want to be aware of the time, but not to take your attention away from a client,
Yeah.
So I usually put the clock, but I don't want the clock to be so close to the client's head in my visual field that it distracts me. So I want it to be a little off where I can't, it'll start to disappear in my peripheral vision,
Right.
but it doesn't take much of an eye movement to check on it. Also, I want manual hands.
Oh, I don't have digital clocks.
Yeah, I want it to be an analog clock, because all I need to see is that minute hand, and I know where I'm at.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes peripheral vision is all I need with a situation like that,
I made sure I bought clocks I liked.
Hmm.
I have several clocks that I really like.
Yeah, because you look at it 10,000 times a day.
So the exercise of buying the clock is, for me, a reinforcer of minding it. So choosing a clock that I really like.
Oh.
I picked several actually some I didn't like as much as the others, but picked several. I had a favorite. I still have the favorite. It's on my desk, and I do Zoom sessions. But the act of choosing it was one way to reinforce the importance of time.
Meaning that
Punctuality.
it's a pleasant clock to look at.
Yeah.
And thus you're more likely to
Yeah.
regard it or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well,
Brenda, good luck. And also, this is not an easy problem to solve. I think my favorite piece of advice here is to be plain with your people.
What was that? Oh, plain.
To be plain with your clients.
Yeah.
That this is a thing. You don't have to talk about the personal stuff of it, the schedule resistance, but to let them know that this is a thing and you're aware of, and that you're open to talking about it, and you don't expect that they're going to just like it or lump it.
You're asking about reinforcement, and Bob brought up some ideas that you can incorporate, like when you're late, you punish yourself, so to speak, by not accepting a fee or by foregoing a fee or something, or even just by bringing it up. If you bring it up like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I'm late.
Yeah.
Just even saying that is a bit of it drives the dagger in a little harder. You know what I mean? Than if you just avoid it.
It's unpleasant to be late and
then to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
That's why people avoid that part of it,
right.
because they don't want that unpleasantness as a
elephant
therapist.
in the room.
Right. So if you have those measures, it could start to rework your brain. The next time you're on that fence or you're at that Y in the road, your body will feel that pain and you'll try to avoid it by being more on time. You could also reward yourself at the end of a week if you do everything great, or the end of a day, by having a nice dinner or having a chocolate cake or whatever.
Well, so the thing about positive reinforcement is I think people undersell it for themselves. Like they don't choose something that's actually reinforcing. Like, so if you're going to do that, and it is a very good idea to use negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement, the body will respond to either. The punishment itself doesn't work, and those are behavioral terms, not just regular generic terms. Positive reinforcement is really, really effective if you choose an actual reinforcer. So don't presume that, I'll give myself a treat is actually reinforcing. It's reinforcing if it actually causes you to be more likely to do the behavior. So choose something that will have that impact on you, that actually freaking matters.
Yeah. And we're using our operant classical conditioning terms of positive and negative wrong. I'm pretty sure we're using it wrong.
No, we're doing okay.
Negative reinforcement is when you take away something.
To make a behavior more likely, you remove something.
Yeah. And then there's punishments and all those kinds of things. And
positive and negative punishments, yes.
Yeah.
Positive punishment is when you do something that's harmful.
Okay. Maybe you're using it right, but I'm using it wrong.
Negative punishment is when you take something away and it causes harm.
Yeah. The way you could provide some goodie, if you will.
A goodie. Real good goodie.
To behaviorally reinforce your body to do this habit more often might be at the beginning of the session when you're on time, is to self-acknowledge just quietly to yourself of like, what a good therapist I am that I did that.
High five.
I worked against my traumas regarding people yelling at me about schedules. I worked against, I did all these things to account for my executive function limitation, and what a great job I did.
Yeah. Also being accountable to somebody else, which doesn't mean that they're the late cop. It just means that they're a person that you let know.
And maybe you only report on how many sessions you were on time for, and that person
shaping
pats you on the back and says, "Great job for being on time for 6 of your sessions today." And you don't mention the 2 that you were late.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. Now, in conclusion, maybe this is the last time we're ever going to talk about this, because I feel like this topic has been talked about more than it might deserve. Because I don't know why. I just, in conclusion, what I want to say is to patron Brenda and everyone else out there that might feel judged by me, I am a little judgy, but that's not fair to you. It's just my problem, I suppose. And
perhaps you feel protective?
I feel protective, but I also, I don't know, I'm just a little judgy about this.
Protective of clients?
Protective of clients, and that's the good side of my judginess. But there's a bad side. There's a holier than thou kind of thing, which could hurt people's feelings, which is my fault, not yours as a listener, or you, Bob. It would make me feel bad if I somehow chastised you in particular, and now every time you're a minute late, you're hearing a chastising, holier than thou voice in your head that I've inserted there.
No, I don't hear that.
Okay.
I do have that thought. I have a thought about you every time I'm on time or a little bit late.
Yeah.
So, once an hour.
Yeah.
On workday. It's okay. It's okay. Hey, one thing that we didn't say that bears is there's a lot of people out there that are in therapy who have therapists that are late. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely reasonable to bring it up and talk about it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely reasonable to do that.
Yeah.
Not easy because it's hard to talk about your relationship with your therapist, but absolutely essential. Mm-hmm. So I hope that people will. I hope that this is a doorway to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you deserve to have a conversation about it. I imagine most therapists would acknowledge and apologize.
Yeah.
And you might be helping your therapist to shape their behavior a little bit. Yeah. So it's not up to you as a client. But anyway, let's take a break. When we get back, more emails. What do you say, Bob?
Yes.
All right, we're back from the break. Bob, so I received a letter in the mail recently, and I talked about this with Umberto, but I thought you might be interested in this letter.
All right.
I framed the letter, which you can see, and so I just want you to read the letter here.
Wow.
I just want you to read
the
letter.
This is from the Washington State Department of Health.
Yeah.
Dated January 31 of this year. Dear Kirk, the disciplinary authority for your marriage and family therapist license credential has received and reviewed a report alleging you committed unprofessional conduct. Oh boy. The report was closed without an investigation or disciplinary action. This report will not appear on our provider credential search webpage because no action was taken against your credential.
So what do you think about that?
This would have made me nervous. How you doing?
Strangely, it didn't make me nervous at all. Wow. Because why would it not make me nervous? Yeah, what would you be feeling if you got a letter like this? Because you could receive a letter like this in the same vein of me. Because if you're a public speaker, a podcaster, a YouTuber, and you're a clinician and you have a license, you invite people who hate you. There's a small percentage that hate you, and then a percentage of those people who hate you will try to get rid of your license by, doing a complaint against you.
Yeah.
And then the government has to look into the complaint.
Right.
And you might receive one of these letters saying that you received this complaint, and they might look into it. They might not. But if you got a letter like that, how would you feel?
Nervous. I'd feel vulnerable. I'd feel like, oh crap, is something coming down the pike anyways? It would just make me feel vulnerable because the thing is we're vulnerable to this possibility all the time. Just most of the time we're not thinking about it, or at least I'm not thinking about it. So do you know anything about the complaint?
I don't. It says in the letter that they're not going to tell me anything about the complaint other than that it happened and it was alleging unprofessional conduct.
So it could be something related to podcasting. It could be something related to a client at some point along the way.
Could be a client, could be a supervisee, could be a student, could be a podcast listener, could be anybody. Could be someone who doesn't even know who I am because anyone can make a complaint.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. But there is a law that says that they have to disclose certain information if you ask for the records. And so you have to go through this process and pay a fee. And
you going to do it?
I did already. I'm guessing it's the government. It takes weeks, months for any kind of response.
Yeah,
but if there is any disclosable information, because then they'll give it to me. But there's a possibility that there isn't any because it might be anonymous and might be confidential.
Right.
Because, of course, you want the public to be able to complain about someone without worrying about reprisal from the licensee, the licensed person like myself. So there's a possibility that there's literally no information that they can give me.
I bet there's nothing you'll be able to...
I don't know. I could imagine there might be some publicly or some disclosable elements to it.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't. Well, I mean, that's what they would all say, right? But yeah, it doesn't tweak me at all because I've been preparing for it for so long. It's been 14 plus years that I've been a podcaster. I think maybe around a few years ago-ish, maybe longer, I saw a lot of other clinicians online getting these kinds of, dubious complaints to their licensing board in their state.
Based on what they were doing as a podcaster.
Yeah. And I concluded myself that these complaints, most of them anyway, were extremely dubious. And I started to prepare myself. And then over time, I started saying, how come I've never had one of these complaints? Not that I want one.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a part of me did because it's sort of a badge of accomplishment or something.
Podcaster rite of passage.
Yeah, I think it is.
Huh.
Yeah. Once you're of a certain tier of notoriety or success, really, in content provision, then odds are you're going to have someone, because, and for the listeners that are listening right now, they might be like, why would anyone complain about Kirk or Bob, or, what's there to complain about, right? Yeah. Now, you could disagree with me. You could think that something was stupid. Because the individual who made this complaint, I don't know their motivation, but commonly the motivation is, I want to get rid of that person's license. I don't want them to be able to practice anymore. Mm-hmm. I want to discredit them as a clinician. If you want to discredit me as a podcaster or a YouTuber, you can comment, you can create a Reddit page or whatever, and, say whatever you want. But to make it so that I can no longer treat my clients or any client in the future, that is something right there.
Yeah, swinging for the fences.
Yeah. The listeners right now might disagree with me sometimes, but to go so far that you actually take the time to figure out how to contact the Department of Health in the state that I'm licensed, and then to fill out the forms. And I'm guessing it's not that hard to do anymore given the internet. But anyway.
Oh, it's probably very straightforward and easy.
Yeah. But there's probably a lot of disclaimers that you have to sign off on, saying, under perjury of law, are you attesting to, there's probably a lot of that in there,
right? Because
the government probably isn't very interested in just random anonymous complaints. You know what I mean? There's probably some kind of attestation that you have to make in order to put your finger down on, this is actually something that happened.
Well, I think you have to be willing to be questioned.
Yeah, right.
And you have to be able to, you have to be willing that they can discredit you for making a frivolous or false complaint.
Right.
I mean, discredit. I mean, what does that really mean?
Well,
but that's humiliating.
Yeah, and scary because you have to answer to some higher authority or something.
If it's a frivolous complaint, is that a what is it? Libel with writing it's libel.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing there are protections in place to allow people to make a complaint. To the government. If this individual were to publicly try to discredit me by saying things that are risky of being false or knowingly false, then I could sue the individual for libel or defamation or whatever.
Slander.
Which happens frequently.
Yeah.
Like, people will literally say things like, and this happened. And so my guess is, regarding this complaint, is that it happened during the trial, during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, because there were so many people that were paying attention to me during that time.
Right. That's
and pretty much everyone who didn't really know me hated me because I wasn't siding either way. I was saying, well, it could be that, could be this. And the general public was staunchly on one side or the other. Like, hardly anyone, even content providers, were hardly any of them were in the middle. And I wouldn't say I was in the middle. I was just saying, I know enough about these scenarios to know not only just in a partner violence, but also memory, but also court proceedings, in which a lot of people have a motivation to spin or lie or leave out certain details.
That's a human condition.
Yeah, they're in court. That's what we understand. Very few people are just getting up there and objectively just running through their memories. They're thinking about their own careers. They're thinking about the consequences to saying this or that. There's
we have a vulnerability to a bias in our self-interest.
Yeah. So
toward our self-interest.
Right. And so what I was saying was, well, if you believe that, then this. If you believe that, then this. But let me talk about general intimate partner violence. Let me talk about general histrionic personality disorder. I don't know if Amber Heard has histrionic, but let me talk about that. Then I would just kind of ramble about it in general. And that was what I did. But to people, that was me siding with whatever side wasn't their side, because I wasn't 100% siding with their side. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So you have tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, who are occasionally dipping into my content. And if you say 0.1% of those people end up hating me deeply, and then you take 0.1% of those people who are going to complain against me, then I got a complaint. is the thing. I can't know if that's
no, you don't know. You'll find out, maybe.
But that seems the most likely. And then the timing of it also, because I get this letter in January.
Right.
The government takes forever to do things, so you can imagine that this complaint was filed in August or something.
Months.
And then it takes a while for it to get processed, and then I get the letter. So it all kind of stands to reason. But yeah, I consider it to be kind of a badge of honor, a rite of passage. Also kind of a test case, because I always wondered, like, what does it look like? What does that letter look like that you get in the mail? Now I know, it's like I've crested the hill and I can see the other side, and I know it's not that bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
It's because for us therapists, this is one of the scariest things that we can ever go through. The random complaint, and then we have to justify ourselves. The other thing that I have on my side is that years ago, because people started to accuse me of things like this, because I started getting more notoriety, because I'm so anal about this, I didn't want to just sit back and wait for a complaint to happen, or wait for someone to wage a major complaint against me. I wanted to get out ahead of it way in advance. And so I spent months writing a white paper on the ethics of a clinician being on social media. Because
what's a white paper?
A paper pulling together all the research and having a thesis or a conclusion something like that. Yeah. Something that you might submit to a journal for publication, but that wasn't its purpose. It was just my own paper that I was writing. Yeah. But I also wanted it to be out there that I had done the work, because that's another thing that I know about these kinds of complaints, is that if you, similar to being late for a session, if you're late to a session and you do nothing to account for it, that's one scenario. If you're late to a session, but you've worked on it in 20 different ways, then that's a different scenario. The second scenario, you're less likely to be found in ethical violation. Whereas the first one, since you didn't do anything about it, you didn't even try to account for it, then it's a slam dunk ethical violation. For me, if someone accuses me of being unprofessional or blah, 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 and I've done nothing to figure out if this is ethical or not, or I don't have any measures in place, any documented measures in place to avoid ethical violations. That's one scenario. Whereas if I've done a ton of research and publicly stating things, and also I shopped the paper around to a bunch of colleagues and clinicians, ethics experts who signed off on what I had done. Because there, to my knowledge, is no paper like this, even in journals, regarding what the topic was, which is therapists basically on YouTube or in podcasting. There are papers or research studies that are about elements of it, but not the full picture. So anyway, I wrote this paper a long time ago, and after going through everything and hiring a lawyer, our lawyer, Fran, and
Fran, she's cool,
going over all the risks and the consultations and just the whole thing, I now feel extremely confident, like I'm standing on very solid ground, that if someone did make a complaint, even if the government started going, this actually looks investigatable, let's start looking into this, I have tremendous confidence that I would be able to defend myself.
Effectively.
And, so bring it on. is my kind of thing.
You're ready.
And it would be, interesting content for the podcast. I'd be able to talk about the whole thing. Not that I want it to happen, dear God, but,
But you're not afraid of it happening.
But I'm not afraid of it, yeah.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, I'm not afraid.
Cool.
Overall, I feel extremely buttoned up.
You think we'll talk about it whenever the government responds?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to.
Yeah.
Especially if there's some details in there. So let's take a break. We get back. More emails. What do you say?
Sure.
All right, we're back from the break. So here's an anonymous patron. She wrote in, says, Hey, Kirk and Bob. Hey, Kirk and Bob. I'm emailing in to seek some words of comfort after my ex-partner attempted suicide very violently a month after I broke up and moved out. I realize cognitively that it is not my fault, but I feel a blanket of guilt and have been playing the image of him dying in the apartment we shared. I'm also worried that my cat is dead because the landlord won't let our mutual friend into the apartment to get the cat.
Oh, my.
I tried calling the local Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but they said they couldn't do anything. So this email...
Wow.
So end of email. This email was sent in a while back, so I'm guessing the cat issue has been resolved.
I hope
but
so.
But what do you have to say to that, Bob?
It's not your fault. I mean, you know this cognitively, but it's not your fault. We're not in charge of what other people do. We can walk up to our side of the fence. And, here's one for you. Nobody says it's my fault if they break up with somebody and that person gets themselves into another relationship and that actually is wholesome and good for them, and then they're married for 900 years or whatever. Nobody ever says, hey, that's my fault. I did that. They only say it if the person does something bad, because the bad stuff's easier to believe. That's Julia Roberts from Pretty Woman, so you can take that to the bank. You ever notice that? She says, it isn't your fault, so be kind to yourself. If words of comfort from me or Kirk are helpful to you, then I'm glad you wrote in, and I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Not your fault. You decided that you wanted to not be in a relationship with this person, and that is your right, obviously.
Yeah.
And even if you broke up with him in a pretty bad way, so to speak,
right,
it is not your responsibility that he resorted to attempting suicide.
Yeah.
Now, maybe if we looked at all the details, could there have been something you could have done to help or something? You don't want to just dump someone and say, well, c'est la vie. Maybe, but it is not your fault that this happened. Maybe no one's to blame, really. It's just a tragedy of his issues, his traumas, his lack of support, his own decisions around not getting support, whatever. There's just so many different things that are completely out of your control and maybe even out of his control.
Yeah.
The other thing is that you have trauma. He attempted very violently, and you now have the image of him dying violently in the apartment that you shared together. The fact you weren't there, you didn't see it happen, but it was described to you apparently.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely enough stimulus to establish ongoing traumatic reaction, including PTSD. So you deserve to have support and grief and trauma recovery in therapy from that.
Yeah.
It's important to think about. And I've treated clients with this exact same thing, where someone attempted or completed particularly again, if it's violent, if it has a lot of violence to it, it can really plague the survivors' heads, the image of it. And then of course some people literally walk in on these individuals after they've completed the violence.
Yeah.
But even if it's nonviolent suicide,
get
absolutely traumatized. Okay. Patron Alley, she says, thanks for the shout out to Saskatchewan on a recent episode with Bob. Do you remember us talking about Saskatchewan?
Vaguely.
Yeah. I often feel like we are invisible to the world here in Saskatchewan. So when I hear our province called out and it's pronounced correctly, I get excited.
Wow.
Just one correction, though. Southern Saskatchewan is flat, farmland, but the north is heavily forested and absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
End of email. Yeah. So I was talking about how Saskatchewan is extremely flat, but it's a humongous province. And I didn't know this, but the north is heavily forested and absolutely beautiful.
Isn't that a fun word to say? Saskatchewan.
Yeah. It's funny that it would be mispronounced, but I guess it makes sense. It's kind of when you look at it, but I've heard it enough times in my life,
Yeah. Puyallup.
Yeah. There's some great cities around Seattle. For those of you 90 Day Fiancé people, you know about Squim. So one of the famous people on 90 Day Fiancé was from Squim.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And of course it's spelled Sequim, but you pronounce it Squim.
Right.
Anonymous patron, he says, hello, Dr. Kirk and Bob. I am trying to get back with my ex-girlfriend, but every time we meet up and I tell her about my feelings for her, I just start to cry uncontrollably. We had a good 2-year relationship with lots of respect and understanding, but she broke up with me because she felt I didn't put enough time and effort into the relationship. I feel embarrassed that she might see me as desperate, weak, and unattractive if I cry, and that any good memory of our relationship will be replaced by the image of me crying. I understand that it's okay for men to cry, but when it happens every time, it's just too much. I think I fear rejection, and crying is how my body reacts. I don't know how to handle this. For context, I keep to myself very much. I'm insecure and very introverted, and I don't talk about my feelings much. So maybe I just need to be vulnerable with other people more often, say what I want, be more real, so I can let the steam out and it doesn't explode at the first chance. Bob, what do you think?
Does she want to get back? We can't tell from the email.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe, it's possibly sort of on the table.
Yeah. Well, I would think that if she wants to get back, do we know that the crying is actually a problem? We don't know. So, I mean, we're presuming that the presumption here is that it's a problem somehow. And I like that sentence. Maybe it's how my body processes rejection. I can't remember if that's how they said it, but that's probably true. But if you're processing rejection, is that what you're experiencing? Is like, are they not interested? Because then maybe a person could consider, what am I doing to myself by putting myself through this? If it's hopeless. If it's hopeless. I don't know if it is. We can't tell from the email one way or the other. But if it's not hopeless, if there's a possibility of it, maybe you could just ask her, does the crying turn her off? She might actually appreciate it. It's sort of the opposite of, did they say that they were sort of inward?
Mm-hmm. Introverted.
Yeah, introverted. It's the opposite of that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing you can do is when you're crying, if you can write it down or just tell her and say, so a big worry that people have, and I think it's legit because people misinterpret tears, is that if I'm going to cry, I don't want to make the other person feel responsible for comforting me or for eliminating the tears or something.
Oh, yeah, right.
I don't want to be a burden on other people with my crying. So one of the things you can do if you're crying is just tell people, look, I'm crying, but I don't need you to do anything about it. It's just how I'm crying. This is one of the big reasons why everyone avoids crying and why people will chastise people for crying, because there's this really weird assumption that if anyone starts to cry, other people are supposed to make it better. Yeah. They're supposed to get you to stop crying. Oh. And or it's their fault that you're crying or something like this. Yeah. And if you just release other people from that, then and they believe you, they have to go along with it, then it can really reduce the tension around one crying. But yeah, it's totally normal to cry, and it sounds like you have a pretty good perspective on it. Yeah. And it also, your idea that maybe you need to be more vulnerable in general so that it lets off steam, because it's quite possible, and you're conceptualizing this way, that you're bottling up all your vulnerability, and then and even when you were in a relationship with her, when you were in a relationship, you were also avoiding and bottling up and not being available and not being connected. And so that's your general policy. And this is why I always say underneath every avoidant person is a preoccupied person, that when you finally get rejected and you're alone and you're hurt, that's when all your desperation comes out as just a flood of emotion. It can overwhelm the avoidant person and cause them to go inward again. But what you're noticing right now is not only your needs for her to get back with you, but also just needs in general, like all day long with all sorts of people and for yourself. So this is a wake-up call to all those tears were under the surface needing to come out, maybe years worth of tears. And so, not only will that help when you're having a conversation with your ex, but it could also help you if you do re-engage with your ex or with anyone else to spread your vulnerability and tears out in a very more healthier way, not only for that function, but also because when you are more vulnerable, you're more connected. People feel like you need them, that you confide in them, that you matter to them, that kind of stuff.
Do you think that underneath every preoccupied person is an avoidant person? I think that might be true.
Well, I would word it differently. I mean, I could be convinced otherwise, but I would word it that every preoccupied person is capable of avoidance at times when things get too hairy for them in terms of pain and rejection and that sort of thing. People will say, I feel like I'm on the fence between preoccupied and avoidant. Sure. And they'll tell me just a litany of signs of preoccupied. And then they'll say, and every once in a while I'll go a year without dating, and because I just don't want to engage. And I'm like, that's not really not avoidant attachment style. Avoidant attachment style is you don't even know you have feelings. You don't even know you need relationships. Right. You legit consciously think that everything's fine and that you're independent and you don't need anyone. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a tactic to avoid the pain of the preoccupation and the pain of abandonment. But could someone have an avoidant side? Well,
let me run something past you, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. What I've noticed about preoccupied people is that they're far more familiar and comfortable with being disappointed than they are in daring to actually seek that which they want. Mm. So I've noticed that preoccupied people often experience their emotions in terms of the other person's behavior. So you did this as opposed to I'm angry about, it's because you, and aren't aware that underneath that is a longing for something. And the something actually might be available, but it's like, I'm not in the habit of actually believing I'll ever get it. All I do is cling. I mean, I don't want to say it that way. It's not the best way to say it, but that's my mode. My MO, as opposed to not avoiding, is to focusing down and clinging. But that doesn't actually meet my attachment need. My attachment need, like I said to Colleen, we were getting ready for a party and she was busy with the stuff, getting ready, blah, blah, blah. And I'm bothered by it. And what I often will do is, I think I mentioned this before, is I will get critical. Mm-hmm. And this time I actually said to her, I want to go through this party with you. I want to be connected to you, which I have not said before, but it's sort of implied by the complaint.
Well, you think it's implied.
I think it's implied by the complaint. Right. And it's not at all.
It's not at all. It's not at all. All it is being critical and hurtful
to
her.
Yeah. To avoid, but I think it's so that I don't experience the longing, because I actually really don't expect her to meet my need, but I don't tell her what my need is.
Oh, so this is what you mean by underneath every preoccupied person is a person who avoids
what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
As a defense.
This is fun.
But I wouldn't call that avoidant attachment style.
No, not avoidant attachment style.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about the preoccupied thing. Though. Yeah. I mean, the avoidant thing.
Yeah, but aside from that, that's a really beautiful way of describing that aspect of life, which is really present for everyone, but maybe particularly for preoccupied. Yeah, but right. I don't know a single person that doesn't have that problem, including myself, where
you don't have any problems.
Will criticize before being vulnerable, will say, like in the example you give, like, setting up for a party or something.
Sure.
And Stacy's the same way, incidentally. Yeah, you and I have often compared our lives personality-wise and our marriages, and there's a lot of
some
common themes. Yeah. And one of the things that
both of our spouses are tall.
Is Colleen tall?
Yeah, she's 5'7".
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Stacy's 5'9" or something.
Yeah, she's tall.
And the other aspect is you and I have very similar body shapes and sizes, and we're the same weights.
Like our builds are similar.
Yeah, our build is very similar,
right,
and we can wear the same clothes, and we've always been that way. But anyway, my point is that when Stacy and I are throwing a party,
right.
She will be just running around, and as the time when people are starting to show up is approaching, she's more and more stressed out. Whereas for me, I can get that way, but I'd rather enjoy the process, the whole thing. Obviously not only the party, live in the moment and make it meaningful and a happy time for myself.
And it's less important that everything is just so. Yeah,
because if that's going to be the dominant vibe, then why the fuck am I throwing a party? You know what I mean? And also in the prep building up to the party, it should also be fun. Like I'm having an Oscar party, which you're always invited, but you never come.
Yeah.
But I am getting prizes together for the contest that we play. Who picks the most Oscar winners. I'm, purchasing all these prizes, and I start months in advance. And it's fun for me, and I like to kind of get the prizes together.
Yeah.
There's a Simpsons prize, there's a Star Wars prize, there's a Harry Potter prize. I know some people might have an issue with that, of course, which I can acknowledge.
Yep.
And I also love to take pictures of them and send them to all the guests. Kind of get the juices flowing. Kind of motivate them. Make sure you watch all the Oscar movies. And then I also printed all these hard copies of photographs from all the Oscar parties we've ever had, and I put it on the fridge. And
fun.
I'm going to make a picture montage and I have a tablet in the kitchen that just
fun. I love those.
Has photographs on a slideshow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so and then we have decorations and everyone dresses up, and I don't know, it's a fun time. And so when I'm heading into a party with Stacy, I have a similar issue where in the midst or maybe afterwards, I'll be like, okay, Stace, next time this happens, let's actually not have that aspect of the expectation of the party because you get so stressed out. Like one of the things that she always does is she cooks a lot of food at these parties. And every time I'm like, let's just get something at the grocery store.
Oh my God.
Pre-made. You know what I mean?
Were you in the room when I had this conversation with Colleen?
And I can get Stacy to agree to it. She'd be like, yeah, maybe that would be better. But then
were
the
you
day
in
of,
the room when I had this conversation with Colleen? Holy cow.
But I think it's for Stacy. I think it's a sexist internalization that she has to do all this. I think it's like
interesting.
They feel compelled to sacrifice,
like social role.
Like they have, otherwise they'll be judged. But none of our friends would give a crap about any of that stuff. Plus, we have friends that do bring a lot of food and a lot of accoutrement.
George would get very judgmental.
Yeah.
George, are you listening?
Yeah.
That's a joke.
Does he listen to the podcast?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. George is like the least judgmental person I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. He's also very thoughtful.
He brought fried chicken to the Super Bowl party.
Yeah, it was good chicken.
Yeah.
So, why are we talking about that?
Oh, because
so instead of so for me, in that situation, I'm just like the unhealthy version that you were proposing, which is to get critical. You know, I'll kind of laugh at her. I'll say like, well, Stacy, every time you're completely stressed out and I'm completely calm because you always do this to yourself, that kind of message. Instead of, I want you and I to have a connection around these times because it feels good to me. I love you. I suffer when you're suffering. And I feel guilty for actually engineering my side of the party prep well in advance so that I'm not running around like a chicken with its head cut off an hour before the party, because I don't want to head into it, because that will happen occasionally. And I don't like that feeling. I don't like that feeling of being like all fight or flighty as people start to show up and I can't think straight. I can't have a smile. I'm all frazzled.
You can't enjoy yourself.
Yeah, it's like I imposed this on myself. I'm the one that initiated the party to begin with, and I'm suffering because of it. Like, what's wrong with this scenario? Like, I need to figure that out. What's my priorities, or what's my plan, or what am I imposing on myself? So, anyway, another email here.
Yeah, right on.
Patron Rebecca says, I was in an abusive relationship with a guy that had undiagnosed EIPS. Do you know what EIPS is?
No.
EIPS. It's all capitals.
Do you know what it is?
No idea.
Oh.
No, EIPS. I can't even imagine what that would be, but
maybe a syndrome?
Yeah. S would be a syndrome. Anyway, I was in an abusive relationship with a guy that had undiagnosed EIPS and dissociative identity disorder for 4 years.
Wow.
I broke up with him earlier this year, and now I have symptoms of complex PTSD and dissociation. I am easily triggered. I have panic attacks. I have a new boyfriend, and he can sometimes trigger me as well. And when he does, I dissociate and or get suddenly very tired or start to cry. What can I do to manage this, or how do I explain this to my boyfriend? Bob, what do you think?
Well, you did a great job explaining it here. Maybe you just read him this email, and then why don't you go seek some trauma therapy? It's very well treatable. I have said this, it's a bit glib. I don't really mean it in a glib way, but if you have to have something like this is the best thing to have, because it is treatable and most people respond and it doesn't take very long, weeks to months. I think in the clinical research, 9 to 15 sessions is for a single event trauma is sufficient to help a person. And yours isn't single event, but it isn't like early life, you're not dealing with that. And so anyways, I hope you'll seek trauma therapy. It's reasonable to expect that it will help.
Yeah, it's really the only answer. If you're talking about developing complex PTSD and dissociation in relation to a long abusive relationship, and that's the main reason or the sole reason as to why you have these symptoms, there's no way one can recover, or very little chance that, especially a non-clinician that doesn't understand how to do this sort of therapy, very little chance that your symptoms will get any better without treatment. It's like having a broken arm and saying you can fix it yourself.
Yeah.
It's you need someone that knows what they're doing to help you with that. But I'm really sorry you went through that, Rebecca.
Yeah, it sucks.
That's awful. You deserve so much better, and you deserve to heal. And it makes total sense that you would have those triggers and those anxiety attacks, because that's what our body does when we go through situations like that.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, let's adjourn there.
That was a fun one.
Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.